Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I can see that you all managed to do a lot of networking over the break. Well, before we go into the upcoming session, I would like Ocean to come up because, well, actually, I'm going to let you explain what you need us to be doing. Over to you, Ocean.
Hello. Yes. Hello. Because the right to health, for me, is the space to breathe. Tegiblo, you are tiekari, you ye fuko sidon, abote, awatrelo, awindi, dem biji wa freko, shayu Tegiblo, you are tiekari, you ye fuko sidon, abote, awatrelo, Arundi biji wa fresco, shayu moro para Tegiblo. Good afternoon. My name is Ocean. My name is Guillermo Armand Blinker Kwamina Ocean, son of Josephine Jacqueline Blinker, son of Armand Robert Fraser. And I'm standing on the shoulders of the ones that came before, that are standing on the shoulders of the ones that came before, that are standing on the shoulders of the ones that came before, and so on and so forth. And that's where I get my power, which is instrumental for my health. And today, I want to share with you a little piece of a bigger whole that I wrote in response to police brutality. Not necessarily the police brutality that I faced physically myself, but the police brutality on TV, on repeat, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, George Floyd, and so on and so forth and so on. So, this piece is called I Was on the News Again. And I'm going to need your help. Are you willing to help me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
I need your right hand on your chest, resting. And every time you hear me say the word black, you're going to tap 2 times, like a heartbeat. Black. Black. Awesome. Every time you're going to hear me say the word deep, I want you to breathe in through your nose and sigh on the exhale. So black, deep. Because you see, I'm not black. I'm deep. You're just looking at something that you don't understand. You don't know how to describe what you see, so you call it black. But that's not me. I'm not black. I'm deep. The black you see is the color of your ignorance. You are in the dark about my life. It's bright. I'm not black. I'm deep. Purple. Like the amethyst that I hold in my hand that's connecting my crown to all the stars in the universe. Look up and feel its infinity. There is infinite possibility that you can see. It might seem black to you, but it's infinite. Like me, I'm not black. I'm deep. It's like when you close your eyes and you enter deep sleep. And the black behind your eyelids becomes the landscape where you create your dreams. Black created your dreams. But it's all gone and forgotten now that your eyes are hit by the light of day and you're woke, awakened by the light of the sun. Well, see, I am the forgotten son of the earth, so the ground you're standing is the ground that made me. I was the first black, everything, and I'll be the last black. Nothing stuck inside the rhythm and blues of a truth that I'll die for time and time and time and time and time and time. We've arrived at the stage where words don't cut it. Like a knife that was once so sharp, but lost its edge through the overuse. The words we use and reproduce now just lose their ability to bring neatly defined slices of life to the table, neatly defined slices of human to the table, neatly defined slices of being to the table. So look up and feel its infinity. There is infinite possibility that you can see. It might seem black to you, but it's infinite like me. It might seem black to you, but it's infinite like me. It might seem black to you, but it's infinite like me. Tegi blow you ati ekari you continue. Abodo e awatra e long. Awindi e biji wa frego. Fucha you mo fire. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I just feel so calm and really centered and ready to go. And I think that, yeah, sorry, I'm just really calm. I meditate a lot, but you know. Okay, and I think that's a really, really good, thank you so much, Otion. Thank you. It's also a really good segue into our first panel. Which we're actually going to be discussing oh my goodness, sorry. We're going to be talking about discrimination, racism, discrimination, and mental health and trauma, which is something that we touched upon a bit in our first meeting all those many months ago. And in fact, that's where we originally met in the corridors of the meeting to talk through all of this. It's my great pleasure to be able to hand over for the panel and to chair the panel. It's my great pleasure to introduce Roshina Spinelli, who is actually the founder and director of BIDS Belgium. And Roshina will give us a very brief introduction to herself, as well as to the panelists will be Marlies Andre from the Marissa Foundation, who was speaking a tiny bit before that. Stephanie oh gosh, I practice this. Stephanie and Zendere ish, and Liz, from Burundian Women for Peace, and Liz Kelly from the Irish Maternity Support Network, all of whom have amazing stories and work that they and their organizations have been doing and do. So over to you, Roshina.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Much appreciated. I don't know if I should have the microphone or whether you can all hear me. It's okay, or you prefer I have the mic? Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Thank you to Thomas, thank you to Mila, of course. It's a pleasure to be here and to be moderating this panel. I'm Rosina Spinlaw. I'm based in Brussels for the last 22 years. I'm Scottish, as you can hear, with South Asian heritage. And what brings me here, just to explain a little, which is why I found the previous, I mean, that was amazing what we heard there. It was incredibly moving. I totally resonate with that. I'm the mother of 3 teenage boys, and one of whom has got mental health challenges and is also neurodiverse. So that's what brings me here, because I often advocate and talk about the challenges that he has faced as a teenager with mental health challenges who has faced police brutality, who has faced lots of challenges within the mental health care system, also when it comes to institutionalization, which, believe it or not, we still do here in Brussels, where we inject youth and put them to sleep, actually, which we have also experienced. So I had the pleasure to share my story last year at the invitation of the European Commissioner on World Mental Health Day. So I'm a great advocate when it comes to mental health, and also this topic of course, racism, discrimination, mental health and trauma. So this first panel of the afternoon will focus on these effects of racism and mental health and trauma. Of course, highlighting how racism against people of African descent can lead to manifestations of mental ill health. And this session, it really takes an intersectional approach, because as we heard a lot this morning, that is what we need. We need to be taking an intersectional approach and include the perspectives such as migration, mental health, and the importance of personal narratives, just as I've shared with you, but also really take the top-down and bottom-up approach. So it's from policy right through to those that are practicing. So on that note, I would love to introduce the 3 speakers that we have, inspiring women, who will be joining and sharing their important work with us. So I would like to ask the 3 women to come and join me on the stage. So Marlise Andre, as we mentioned there, from the Marisa Foundation, co-founder and director. And Stephanie Mabanzandori, please join us. And Stephanie is from the Burundian Women for Peace. And then we've got Liz Kelly from the Irish Maternity Support Network. So I will please take a seat. Liz. So what we'll be doing is we'll be listening to our 3 inspiring speakers, and then we will have a question and answer. And I would love for you to all be interactive and you know, having questions, and encourage a discussion, an interactive discussion. So Marlise, I'll start with you. So thank you all for joining. And Marlise, I won't share all of your bio, I'll leave that to you, but I will just share one line here. As someone who's deeply involved in activism and advocacy for marginalized communities, you really work on the strategies that you find most effective in mobilizing support and creating impactful change for transgender women and people of colour. So I hand it to you, Stephanie, Marlise, to talk. If you wish, you can take the podium, or if you just want to be relaxed and you want to talk here, that's also up to you. I leave it to you.
I think I would rather sit here so it doesn't feel like it's a lecture.
Let me pass the microphone, of course.
Yeah, I hate lectures because I've heard enough of those. Thank you, Rosina, for the wonderful introduction. I'm Marlise Andre. As I said, I'm from Germany. I'm the co-founder of the Marisa Foundation. And yes, I don't know where to start, but my street credits are I studied medicine, and that is what led me to starting my activism, because maybe for some of you all, when you were in university, you did engage in certain stuff like junior achievers, debate clubs, and all these things. And I always knew that I was a good debater, even though I was very, very shy. And when I moved to Germany with the dreams of saying, I'm going to do a PhD and change the world and do all that, I got slapped in the face and I was told, sit down, it doesn't work like that. And that led me to activism, because the only place that I found solace and acceptance is within my communities, is within finding people who came to Berlin, who came to Germany years before me and could be able to share for me their experience and indulge me in conversations, really, because it's difficult in Germany to make friends, considering you don't speak German and everybody looks at you like you're weirdo. So that's where my activism started. And I was like, I have a medical background, I have a migration background coming to Germany, and I'm a trans person. How do I fuse these things together? And so I explained to people in the lightest terms that I work on the intersection of healthcare and migration. And then now you can incorporate aspects of gender identity, sexual identity, healthcare, and all this other stuff. So, strategies is a difficult question. But before I get to that, it's more better to understand where I am coming from. So Germany is a very, very difficult place to be able to maneuver, to be able to quite understand a lot of things that operate in the system, especially coming as an outsider. So one thing that I learned that was the most, I would say, the core that built me up was holding hands with other people and not trying to come in and change the system. And this is one of the most important things that I have found as strategy works. We are not telling easy stories. We're talking about how mental health affects people. We're talking about medical racism. We're talking about transphobia and trans hatred and queer hatred to quite a lot of people. These are not easy concepts to communicate to people. So I wrote a bunch of stuff that I thought that would be important to let you know about what strategies I have found through activism and transitioning from activism to be able to sit into a place like this and how I ended up here. So I ended up here as we partnered with the Federal Association for Transgender People in Germany to write a report to the Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Racism. And we were tasked, or we were told, to not sound cliche or repeat what has already been told. And I decided to tell the story of how is it living in such a place like Germany. And that's where we came up with the concept of that double or triple, 4 times marginalization. So we told the stories through the lens of, I'm a Black person, I'm a trans person, I have low income, and I come from a disprivileged family. And how do all these things connect, compounded with my identity as a person of African descent, to make my situation even more worse, be it in hospital when I'm going to talk to a doctor to tell them, hey, I think I have a problem, and the doctor looking at me and telling me, I think you're just saying that to strengthen your asylum case. Mind you, I'm on a different kind of visa, because that's the first thing that comes into the mind. They see you as a person who's Black, but then they realize you are other. So you're trans, you're lesbian, you're gay, and then it becomes even a harder conversation to have with the doctor. So this is the kind of report we tried to tell the committee, to tell the German government. And I think it's one of the first ever types of reports that have not particularly only dealt with racism and with people's skin color, but showing how racism is it's a spectrum, and it affects people in different formats. And that's where I met Mila and Thomas, and we decided to have these wonderful conversations about that. So that's the box. How have we been able to be successful, and how have we been able to do a lot of stuff? So when I started, I had the illusion that I would be able to change the world, that I would come in and I have these new ideas. I'm pretty good with reading studies and listening to podcasts for 3 hours in a row and being able to digest everything. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. And the first thing that I realized is that you need to understand the community that you're trying to serve. If politicians understood this, maybe we would have a different reality than we have right now. So community organizing is one thing that I would like to share that has been a success story to us. Understanding the community that you work with. The first organization we made was a registered NGO in Germany, which was a difficult thing to achieve and even get state funding. We were in Kreuzberg. If you know Berlin, you know Kreuzberg is a hotspot of different communities and all that. So we tried to say that me and my other co-founders, so we want to tell a story and how do we address the community? So we understood that the Western medical system is created as a system of medicate and isolate. You see your doctor, you're done, you go home, you come back to get your checkup, and then you see each other next time. And then in between, if you're suffering, you're on your own. And that's why people run to chiropractors and TikTok to get advice on how to deal with pain. So that's one thing. And then you realize the system of this kind of way of approaching healthcare is built on ableism, body negativity perspectives. It's built on sexism. It's built on racism itself. So we decided to say that we want to approach community organizing from a holistic perspective, to say that healthcare to us is not just you come in your life. I am suffering from mental health, or I feel like I need to speak to somebody, or I need to find a doctor, because those are the questions we get a lot. When people realize the kind of work we do is like, I need a therapist who doesn't speak German, speaks a bit of English, or speaks Spanish or French, and is culturally competent to be able to understand me and won't gaslight me. So through this community organizing is where we understood that if we bring this concept in, we say we create the structure, we develop and do the background work of developing lists for doctors that people can access online, sharing them as Google Docs, sharing them as all these things, then maybe the community can be able to trust us enough to tell us the needs that they have, and then we can organize together. And that only works if you do not have an agenda, if you do not have hierarchical structures that say, oh, I'm the boss, I'm the person who's getting all the clout, and I'm just there using the community to achieve my own needs. And through this, we have had success on breaking isolation. There's a lot of communities in Berlin, and I hate this perspective that in Germany we use the word persons with migration background. Yeah, we are all with migration backgrounds, but we are very different communities. And so we realize that there's this deep entrenched isolation that sits in the city. And just a quick example, if you're an asylum seeker in Germany, for example, and if you seek asylum, and statistically, the Federal Office for Refugees and Migration says that your country has a positivity or acceptance rate of less than 50%. You're not allowed to study German. You're not allowed to do quite a lot of stuff. And probably you're gonna, because they distribute people in the 16 federal states of Germany based on their nationality. So if you're a Nigerian, if you're a Kenyan, you're sent to Brandenburg, which is predominantly white and predominantly very conservative. So we had people coming from all these other places saying that somebody told me about you, and that you have a table where trans women can be able to meet every Sunday. And so we realized that we were able to break this sort of isolation. And this was distributed through power sharing. And power sharing is one important aspect that most people fail to realize, that first of all, you cannot do it all, and you need to trust the people that you work with. So to recap, the strategies that I have found the most that work for us is community organizing by trusting the communities that you work and not manipulating the trust that has been put in you. And through that, one thing is that maybe most of you here can be able to share your stories. I know a lot of women, Stephanie is one of them, and maybe she can talk about how it is to break this sort of isolation that people who come in, either they're old and they cannot access classes to speak German, they are persons living with disabilities or chronic diseases, and they're not able to access the systems for a plethora of reasons that have been discussed earlier. Have we not touched on them? And lastly, I think we need to address the issues that exist. And one thing that I wanted to say, and I hope I get invited again, is that communities lose trust in people like us, or communities lose trust in the system even more with very little trust, because we come here, we talk about a lot of stuff, we discuss quite a lot of things. It's going to be posted online. And this is something that I have gone through for the last 8 years that I've been doing this. And I'm usually being cast out on one side by people who are saying, how dare you sit with those people considering they're the oppressors? And on this other side, oh, you're too radical. You're not supposed to do like that. You're not supposed to work with illegalized people. How am I supposed to turn another Black sister or another Black queer person coming to me and telling me they want to deport me back to Uganda? And I'm an openly non-binary person who has been doing activism offline and online. How am I supposed to turn them away? So I think the last thing that needs to be addressed mostly is maintaining this sort of, we are not only talking, but also reports. I know there's limited work that organizations like this or us can even do. I struggle with this myself, but I feel like giving opportunities to stuff like this and the Dutch person, I'm forgetting the name, I can't pronounce it, said it is more like how do we put trust on a person like them to petition the government to be able to put the needs of our community to these people. I come from a marginalized, triple marginalized community, and we've been told, and it's an open secret in the community that they're gonna say that nothing is gonna happen. They're just gonna receive the funding and it's gonna go on. I am a young person. I mean, I'm not that young, but I'm young and I don't want to redo or reproduce what has been said over and over again and to institutionalize Black lives. So this is something that we have an honest conversations with our communities, and we have an honest conversations to say, we are trying our best, but it's not easy. But we need help from the UN, we need help from governments to say that we are just not working with you because it's gonna look nice when we say Berlin is the queer capital of Europe, and it's only for clout. So I'm not gonna talk too much and bore you, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Marins, for that. Of course, we'll come back to a lot of the things that you've mentioned there in the discussion and the question and answer session that we will have. And now I'm going to pass on to Stephanie, who was born in Burundi, and she's a prominent voice amongst the Burundian community in the Netherlands and beyond. So on that note, I'm going to pass on to you to tell us more about your important work, Stephanie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I feel as a privilege to sit here and talk to the audience. Yeah, because people do things, but sometimes the things I do not know. And for me today, as I feel from the Netherlands, coming here in the UN house, I see a step further that I do in my life, in my work. And thank you for the people who invite me to be here. My name is Stephanie Bazingore. I'm the founder of the Burundian Women for Peace and Development, a diaspora women organization working on peace and conflict, community building, and trauma healing. It has been 26 years since I was forced to leave my native country, Burundi. At that time, the country was submerged in a political conflict and an ethnic war. I had the good fortune to be received in the Netherlands. You would understand that I came to Europe as a political refugee, leaving behind my husband and my 2 sons. At the time, I was 8.5 months pregnant. The adventure that I took was not without risks. I still remember when I had my baby alone by cesarean section, without knowing the language of the country, without knowing anyone in the host country. In my home country, a woman who gives birth is considered as a queen. The whole village knows, and visits are made constantly. My first cultural shock was that no one came to see me. No one was interested in knowing why I did have anyone visiting, and frankly, no one cared. I still remember that at the moment, the nurses would only attend to me when the baby was crying too loud, or helping me get out of the bed because the first days were not easy. As for the welcome in general, I'd like to say here that the host country tries to give the best attention with regard to material needs. Refugee are offered a house, an allowance as means of subsistence, basic health care, education opportunities for the children, and everything else. However, I see lacking in the migration policy. What I see lacking in the migration policy is specific attention for the mental state of migrants and mental health care. Because migrants, especially those arriving from countries in conflict, face so many problems that it's important to have someone to talk to. Having to leave your country, your belongings, your friends and relatives, and living while knowing exactly where to go is a journey that's so heavy that it has to be taken into account when you welcome such people. In the integration process, it is very important to look at mental health. Otherwise, people are requested to start an integration process, but still left with open wounds without a perspective at healing. The lack of attention for trauma healing in the integration process of migrants has consequences at the household level and the education for the children. Bad memories of the migration journey or loss of identity still cause triggers for parents who consequently are abusive toward their children. Also, the contextual circumstances are not always helpful. Even after many years, refugees do not feel welcome in Europe. Imagine being referred to as a refugee wherever you go and being judged for it. It not only promotes feelings of inferiority, but also reinforces trauma from the past. In view of the above, I decided to start a foundation that could offer safe space to talk and deal with trauma and trauma healing. Also, the foundation offered a platform for awareness raising and advocacy to ask a government institution to deal differently with arriving refugees. As a member of civil society, I do believe that refugees should participate and make their contribution to the host countries. It's not for the host countries to have people who cannot be useful because their mental health is wavering, while the host countries do invest to welcome refugees with some level of dignity. This elementary writing of traumatism linked to the war must be on the agenda in all projects relating to migration in developing countries, as well in a project in countries emerging from conflicts. Only mentally sound people can participate in development, but the mentally ill should first receive proper treatment. It is important that civil society organizations work closely together with the humanitarian organization in order to monitor measures involving mental health care for migrant and refugee. Thank you for your listening.
Tiffany, thank you for sharing your personal story and your work. It was very moving. Thank you for that. I move on to Liz Kelly from the Irish Maternity Support Network. Liz is an independent maternity advocate and certified mediator. She's a director also of Irish Maternity Support Network. And so Liz, I pass on to you to explain more of your work and what you're doing in Ireland.
Thank you very much for being invited here today to explain some of what we do in Ireland to support the women that come from so many other countries now into Ireland more recently. I realise that I don't have lived experience, obviously, to share with you, but I do hear from women and speak with women all the time who are alone and isolated in our maternity services, not understanding and not cared for in culturally appropriate ways for them, mainly because of our lack of understanding and education in this. So I'd like to begin by just sharing a line from one of our most famous poets, W.B. Yeats, which is, "There are no strangers in the world, only friends we haven't yet met." And I think if we all looked at the world in this way, it would be a much better place. And this is the way that we hope to, in Ireland, to greet people who we welcome into our country. Just a brief background to put everything in context of what we do. Ireland always had net emigration. Vast numbers of Irish people emigrated for many years. We didn't really have immigration into Ireland until sort of the late 1990s and 2000s, after we experienced a boom in our economic state, which was called the Celtic Tiger. And this led to numbers of migrants coming into Ireland from different countries around the world. The migrant population in Ireland now, the Irish population has topped 5 million for the first time since the 1800s. And the 20%, more than 20% of our population, actually I have the figure here, 26% of our population is now made up of people entering the country. So the generation of people from African backgrounds, they're not descendants of African, they are African themselves, who have come in, and there are children now born in Ireland who are Irish African children. So it's a young population, and we've a lot to learn from them. The migrant groups are sort of three separate groups in Ireland. We have people who come in to improve their lives, for education, students, to improve their lives, and that as well. And then we also have people come in for safety reasons, and they would be some classed as international protection applicants. And there's different systems for the different groups that come into Ireland. The international protection applicants would be, they would receive housing and a small allowance and that. But for women in those groups, they are extremely isolated. They are alone. They really seldom don't speak the language. And they're often isolated, not just in terms of not having family with them or anything, but also in terms of physical isolation. They're often in locations where public transport is poor and they can't access. It's very difficult to access healthcare. So where my story begins with the contribution here of what we did, we realized as an advocacy association, we began to realize that there appeared to be disproportionate numbers of maternal deaths in our maternity system of women who were coming from non-Irish, but mainly African and Asian backgrounds. But we weren't sure about this because the data collection, these are themes that I'll be repeating, themes that you've heard all day, in the same thing. The data collection was poor. There was no clarity in our data. So even though Ireland does have quite a low maternal mortality rate, about between 5 and 9 women per year out of a birth rate of between 65 and 56, it's gone down to 56,000 now. It still appeared that anecdotally, because we don't know all the women maybe who would have died, that anecdotally there appeared to be a higher number of non-Irish women in those numbers. So we began to watch and monitor and see what the situation was. And in 2010, a Nigerian woman died in one of our maternity hospitals. And the student midwives were very concerned about the manner of her care and what maybe had or had not been done that should have been done. And they approached one of their professors, who's a sociologist, and they began to look and see and investigate this. And as we continued, an investigation was called for into Bimbo's death. But we realised that there was no mandatory maternal inquests in Ireland, where a death of a woman who died in childbirth could be investigated, learning could be taken from it, and recommendations could be made, see what the failures were and everything else. So we began a campaign to change the law, to bring in mandatory maternal inquests, because this would give us information and it would improve safety for everybody accessing the maternity services. It would discover what the failures were and how they could be changed and how practice could be improved. So the campaign was a very simple campaign initially. A group came together of educators, activists, advocates, families of women who had died in the services, artists, poets, a lot of people. One of the interesting features about this group was we were all older women, many of us, including myself, grandmothers. And I think this may have been a factor in some of our persistence and some of our ability to keep going through the system against all the setbacks. I think some of that was experience. And I think in a world where, you know, we talk about all forms of discrimination, that I think we need to take into account that the older population have an awful lot to offer in terms of support and experience to people who maybe don't have the time often. One of the other reasons is maybe we had a little more time. We weren't looking after babies and children, and that may have been a feature. We began our campaign, an artist, Martina Heinen, who drew beautiful portraits of all the women, painted portraits of the women. And we mounted an exhibition. We made a quilt, which hundreds of people at our meetings knitted and contributed. And we went on 15 meetings throughout the country to raise awareness of this and bring it to the attention of our politicians. It began to be, we had our financial situation, we had what we called a jam jar budget. I don't know if any of you are familiar, like a jam jar where you put your pennies in and add it up. We never had a budget of more than, I think, well under 2,000 at most of the time. We raised money through crafts, crochet and that. So finally, we came to the attention of the politicians, and a politician brought it in a private member's bill to change our Coroner's Act, so that a coroner would have the power to, every maternal death must be reported mandatory to the coroner and investigated formally within a proper proceedings in a court of law, so that all the information would be on record and be there and recorded. The first public member's bill that the politician brought wasn't successful, but we continued, we kept going. And we have another system in Ireland of county councils. And if 23 county councils petition to the government, it has to be listened to and it has to be taken. So we went that route, and finally it was. And then, so it was taken into it, was debated, and it was continued. And then it had to be brought again. The second time it was brought, there was a technical difficulty in how the bill was produced. So it was, again, it didn't go through. So the third time we tried and we succeeded. And in 2019, the bill for mandatory maternal inquests into maternal death was passed and enacted. And since that time, we've had 4 inquests. They were the factors that led us to getting this passed. There are still problems with this bill. There are still teething problems. We need education of the coroners, education of the system to produce it. The coroner can only make recommendations, can't implement anything, but we'll still keep pursuing this. Then the reason I think I'm here today is we came to Brussels. We were invited to Brussels to mount the exhibition and to explain what we had done and how the law. So we discovered in Brussels, much to our shock, that instead of being what we had considered the only country without such a law in place, we were actually one of the first to pass it. And we consider this extremely important in terms of safety. The other way is our maternity system is very, the background, it's very medicalized, it's obstetric led, although the care is delivered by midwives. And the data is now collected by NPEC, which is an audit, and they collect the data. So now we have data, but they also do identify what group and what nationality, what ethnicity women are in this situation. So we do have a breakdown, an honest breakdown of the numbers, and we can see what the problems are. And we can ask women now in those communities what they need. We had a recent seminar on diversity in the maternity service in Ireland, and we're, you know, giving opportunities for women from all the different communities to speak to what they need. And they say what they need is culturally competent and appropriately sensitive care. As a nation who emigrated, our Irish people are very aware of what it feels like to be in a country alone. And we're also aware that we've so many, there's 182 languages spoken in Ireland now. So we're very aware, and we're also very aware that not all, as Marie said, not all women, the communities, all those communities are different. You know, they're not all, it's not one homogenous group, and we need to be aware of that too, and what people want and what people need. So I think the lessons we have learned from this are, first of all, and this leads into the second part of the time to deal with the trauma experienced, is listening to women. And that's why, you know, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, because I work with women all the time who are experiencing trauma in the maternity system. I sat less than 2 weeks ago with a woman from Bangladesh who has experienced trauma. One of the biggest difficulties is the language difficulties. We don't have an officially competent or a big enough system of interpreters. The other thing about maternity care and gynecological care, it's intimate care. And this is something that is frequently forgotten by the medical profession, that it is intimate care to the woman receiving it. There is very little, again, here's the repetition again of the theme that's coming up. There's very little data coming, in general anyway, and practically none when it comes to what migrant women experience in our care. We had a study done by Muslim women in Ireland recently, and for them, the intimacy of the care is, while it's important for every woman, it has the added challenge for them because it's a religious you know, stipulation for them, and they find it extremely difficult. But this is only a very small little bit of research that has been done, and we need a lot more. So it's listening to the women, the trauma experienced by all women following, and it's a difficult term to use, and it's controversial, obstetric violence. And I must say it because we must speak now about the violence experienced by women throughout globally in maternity care. We know there's best practice, and we know the impact of both good practice and bad practice, the impact and the consequences of violence in whatever form. It's similar to domestic violence. It doesn't always mean physical violence. It means coercion. It means, you know, blackmail, emotional blackmail, all these things. There are additional challenges for women from migrant communities who, even when they experience birth trauma, and with all women, perinatal mental health, there is very little support and help afterwards. But when women from, particularly from African communities, come to see it, because Ireland, because the population is so young, there are not yet counsellors trained. The youngest children, you know, African-born children or Irish-born African children are only finishing school now. So they're not trained up yet. You know, they're not. We have some midwives who have gone into the system. So we have African midwives, and we have, you know, a lot of Indian midwives as well. But they can't see counsellors who look like them, who understand their background. And that's very, very difficult. And try our best. We can't, you know, we can't provide the care that they deserve and they need and they're entitled to. And this is something that we'd want to look at. So they're the two brief topics that I hope I've covered. There's a lot more. I could talk all day, I'm sure, as you can see. But hopefully that gives you some idea of the actions that we took, a practical action that was successful and has an impact throughout Ireland in data collection, in as with the mandatory. We'd love to see, we would call on, I know you mentioned here that there are people in decision-making positions here. We would love to see some EU directive or something that could be passed to secure this throughout Europe. That just simply on that one point, mandatory maternal inquests. The migration population in Europe, which I know very little about, is invisible in some ways in the data. Certainly seems to be invisible in the data. And that would be a start for safe maternity care. And then I say perinatal mental health, the impact on women. It's not just on women. We know the consequences. We know the consequences are personal. The second greatest cause of maternal death is suicide in the postnatal period. And that it needs to be looked at also. So we know that the damage to relationships, to families, to children, the community and the wider society. And when mothers' health and maternity care are looked after, when the investment is made in that, society can be transformed. Maternity care should be peaceful. It should be the place where peace begins. We can provide good, caring, compassionate maternity care, evidence-based, woman-centered, person-centered. And with the woman at the center, making the decisions, we can transform our society, I hope.
Thank you so much for that, Liz, and congratulations on your work. In fact, congratulations to the three of you for the amazing, inspiring work that you all do. I think in order to sort of encourage a discussion, because we've learned a lot about, you know, how that kind of grassroots activism, that storytelling, that narrative, how the personal story encourages also to work in that field, and being able to give a voice to those who perhaps don't have a voice, and really enabling community from grassroots right through to policy making, which is excellent, and taking that kind of holistic approach, having the empathy, listening, it's really important, and giving them safe spaces. I'd love to, I have some questions I'd like to put, of course, to our panelists, but I would love to get some interaction from our audience. Anyone that would like to put their hand up if you have any questions at all that you would like to ask each of our three amazing women. Nobody, come on. Then, Mila.
Jacqueline first.
Oh,
Please.
no,
Go,
no,
go, go, okay.
I'm just microphone lady.
Well, thank you so much. Now, filling the space while you get inspired to comment or to ask a question. The topic of data is going to be very much covered tomorrow. Thank you so much for raising it today. I really hope if all of you can be tomorrow to continue this discussion. And I have one question or pondering probably for all of us. Policy is usually written in a very dry language. Policy is not catchy. And any policy document, statement, of course, we know what the purpose of those documents are, but the more we read them, the faster we go through them, and the less we manage to imagine what is really the magnitude of human suffering that those documents are trying to address. So here my question is, and again, tomorrow we are going to have the big discussion on how data and information not coming only from very few official sources can be streamed at the assessment stage and the evaluation stage of public policy, which by itself already sounds dry, no? How we can put in the policy documents all these narratives and personal experiences that, of course, are not generalizable in statistical terms. I'm a statistician and semi-health educated person by profession. How we can bring those stories into policy documents and give them the sufficient credibility and weight without diluting them and masking them in the policy language. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That does make sense. I'll put it to the audience, but I mean, just can I just answer that from my own personal experience level? I think we absolutely need the narratives and storytelling. This is so impactful. We need the lived experience to be heard, and we're starting to see more multi-stakeholder groups like this, or co-creating or co-designing policy with having multi-stakeholders. It doesn't necessarily have to be people that are in the medical profession, but there's more value given from those with the lived experience that share it on the table, because we can identify where the gaps are, and we can say what are the solutions of where we would have liked to have those ideal solutions. So I think that's really important. Anyone like to answer that? Or at least
That's a very good question. Where do I start? So we've been able to put forward lots of reports talking about racialized queer lives and double marginalizations in Germany, in Berlin, and in rural areas, because these get overlooked. Excuse me, and inside medical systems, for example, and one of them also includes mental health specifically. I can give a personal story. Last year, February, I'll be very fast. Last year, February, I got invited by one of the political parties in the coalition that was involved in the formation of the gender self-determination law for trans people. I was seated there like this. I was the only racialized person. I was speaking. I didn't choose to, but I was put in a position to speak for Black and brown bodies, and any other person is an ism to them. The rest of the folks were, of course, trans folks, but they were white folks. And this kind of like being squeezed in to bring in the lived reality story comes as an afterthought. And the difficult part is that I got considered multiple times as the expert to talk on the gender self-determination law. And we suggested quite a lot of things. And one example that I can give, I was suggesting that there's a lot of folks who have been born in Germany who are considered stateless, and they hold blue passports, but they have no possibility of accessing citizenship. And so because Germany considers their identity unclarified, then they are not able to access certain stuff. And because we also work in a federal systems, the way Berlin will interpret that law is not the same way as Bayern will interpret that law, and these kinds of things tend to happen. And I asked the question, what about asylum seekers? I know it's reasonable to think that if somebody is coming from Sudan, is coming from Somalia, we are bound by the principle of non-refoulement. We're not going to deport them back to this country. So there is a possibility that even if they stay in toleration, as we call it in German, they're going to be in Germany. How are they allowed to change the gender markers and all this? And I put this forward. And it was a lived reality experience. I mentioned quite a lot of people. I mentioned what is happening with the anti-gender movement. But guess what happened? This didn't make it to the last version of the bill. The information is there, but I am thinking that maybe we are having some sort of like skewed approach to the question. And it should be that the way the Constitution says, oh yeah, in the formation of a law, the public shall be engaged and shall give their feedback. Maybe we need to change that and say that if, let's say, the two ministries coming together to form this bill and they're responsible for it, it has to be given that if 3 ministers, one of them has to be from the community. And I think that's the best question, bringing in the community into the formation of the bill itself, not to come and give examples that are not taken.
thank you for that. Stephanie, I want to come to you now. I would love for you to share some of the insights into some of the trauma healing initiatives that you do in your organization, and really how these have also impacted the community. Now, I bring this up also because last week when we'd had this sort of introduction in our conversation for this panel, we spoke also that some initiatives require perhaps, you know, training and more awareness from authorities, and some of these authorities can also perpetuate more trauma rather than healing. And so I wanted to pass that to you, Stephanie, and share some of that.
I would like to say it in French, then I will say it properly. And Jacqueline will translate. J'ai beaucoup d'exemples à donner, mais je donne un exemple, ce que j'ai fait en Hollande au niveau de voir comment le traumatisme lié à la guerre infectait.
Okay, so I have lots of examples to give, but the one that I'm going to give is how trauma due to war, an example from the Netherlands.
Comme je disais, moi je suis en Hollande depuis 26 ans et j'ai commencé mon organisation en 2001.
So as I was saying, Stephanie has been in the Netherlands for 26 years and started her organization in 2001.
J'étais déjà traumatisée moi-même.
I was already traumatized, as I said.
J'ai rencontré d'autres Burundais qui étaient traumatisés comme moi dans différents secteurs. Moi, j'étais traumatisée d'avoir été dans un pays, eu un enfant seul, sans soutien, sans quoi que ce soit, et les autres avaient d'autres traumatismes de leur part.
Okay. So I was meeting other Burundians who either like me had been traumatized by being alone, no help in a country as I already described, or other things which they had come across during their journey.
Et je me suis dit, comment nous sommes des femmes intellectuelles qui ont étudié, qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire pour avoir des solutions à nos problèmes?
Yeah. So, and then I said to myself, well, as educated women, how can we find a solution to all of these problems and situations that we're facing collectively?
Alors, comme je racontais cela à quelqu'un, il m'a dit, seul, tu ne pourras rien, mais chercher un espace où tu pourras parler.
So I spoke with somebody who said, on your own, you won't be able to do anything. You need to find a space, a safe space where you can all talk.
C'est comme ça que le Burundian Women for Peace and Development était né.
And that's how the Burundian Women for Peace was born.
Quand on a eu les papiers, j'ai été à la municipalité de Rotterdam aujourd'hui.
So when we got the papers, I was at the Rotterdam municipality where I live.
J'ai parlé à un fonctionnaire.
I was speaking with a civil servant.
Et le même jour, j'avais un espoir de pouvoir avoir un projet honoré pour pouvoir travailler sur cela.
And the same day, I had the hope of starting a project with somebody listening for what we wanted to do and starting straight away with that.
C'est comme ça que nous avons réalisé le premier projet pour essayer de travailler sur le traumatisme lié à la guerre. C'était un projet de 2 ans.
And that's actually how we managed to achieve our first project, which was about war-triggered trauma. And that project lasted for 2 years.
Yes. Ça, c'était le commencement. Quand on a fait ça, on a eu plus de chances d'être connus parce que le problème était vraiment réel. Et je n'ai pas seulement travaillé avec le Burundi, parce que le Burundi, le Rwanda et le Congo sont dans une même région. Les participants venaient des 3 pays,
Okay, so that was the beginning. And for that meant that we were known as an organization, and also it meant, particularly for that project, that we didn't only work with Burundians, we also worked with the neighboring countries to Burundi. So Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi together.
Je pense que c'est une longue histoire. Je ne peux pas continuer parce que jusqu'à aujourd'hui, nous faisons le travail et ce projet de trauma healing, nous l'avons même dans notre pays, le Burundi.
Okay, so I see other people understand French too. So basically, as Stephanie was saying, that was only the beginning, and actually they've been able to take that project back to Burundi as well. So it's not only for.
J'ai été nominé pour le prix de la paix en Belgique, à Hyper.
Okay.
Avec ce projet.
Not need me to translate.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. I'm conscious of the time, but Liz, I wanted to quickly just come to you very quickly. We're running about 5-10 minutes over time there. But I just wanted to ask you on this level of the advocacy work, you're also balancing this at a very local level. You're also sort of advocating at national level and international level, obviously with being here. So I just wanted to ask, what are the sort of key challenges and the successes that you've experienced in promoting this sort of evidence-based maternity care within the human rights framework?
Yes, well, first of all, yes, I mean, for me personally, and I think it's always, is that advocacy is always about the individual person, and we can never lose sight of that. I still will always, speak individually with women and with people experiencing maternity care, and to bring their voices. I'm not a natural leader or speaker. There are women, I can't even speak here for if you had somebody here from the African community, they would be, I'm sure, telling you very different stories than my perspective. And, please understand that I can't, I would like to, and we encourage people and we want them to speak, but for the moment, if they come to us and they're still in the midst of, say, trauma and everything, so we wouldn't leave them there. We will do our best for that. So the balancing is that it's always about the individual person, and I think that goes back a little bit to Mila's question about how do you bring the person into the policy, that the policy always has to be for the people. And we look and we see, and I know because I've been on policy groupings, policy making groupings, guideline groupings, and we're always like the advocates, the maternity advocates, whether it's an individual person who has experienced trauma, whether it's an individual person with any experience, we're always sort of the last one or two people considered at the table. And then we're basically ignored, and it's ticked off. Oh yes, we had this and we had this and we had this and we had our patient advocates, and they've covered all the boxes. And I think we need to rebalance maybe policy making to take into account that in actual fact, the people providing the care, the medical system providing the care, the people providing the budgets are doing it for us, for the people receiving the care. And we need to change that dynamic, that it's the people receiving the care that should be involved in designing it and in saying what they need from the beginning to the end. We have the universal design. I don't know if you're familiar, but universal design means designing for the people who need most, and then it works for everybody. So I think we need to start listening and acting, because maybe before there would have been a time when people like me or people advocates or people, we wouldn't have been maybe the educated people in society. We wouldn't have been, the doctors and the judges and the politicians would have maybe been more educated, but now Ireland actually has the most educated population, I think, in Europe, if not more, with higher level. We have the experience and the education to be able to design our own systems, and I think the policymakers, if they can take that into account.
With a design background, I'm a big advocate of universal design, so I completely agree with that. Thank you for that.
that decision-making must always belong to the person receiving the care. Always, they must always be making the decisions about their care.
There must be
That's the
inventor.
human right, that's the human right.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm sorry that, oh, we have one question there. I don't know, we are running a little bit out of time. Thomas, I ask you, could we take one more question or not?
Sneak one more question.
Sneaky one more question. Okay,
Make it quick.
right. Very. Pass the mic to you, or you want to?
I'm Hofnar from Big Mothers Matter. I would like to acknowledge two things that I heard. Well, at least I know very well. But Stephanie, I want to link with you too. You just mentioned when you came to Europe, you were not received as a queen when you were a mother, when you were receiving your baby. And that's what creates, even in Europe, for the population in Europe, in our mothers, that's what can generate perinatal mental conditions. Because we forgot the village, we forgot to acknowledge this, that during the delivery, we are bringing a new life to this world, and we should be accompanied. You should have received all the visits that you deserve. It takes a village to raise a child, and our families are living right now in isolation. We don't have the support that we used to have long time ago, and that's why we are seeing more and more cases of it's not just the baby blues, it's more than that for many cases, and it doesn't have to be medicalized, but it just needs to just be recognized that women, when they are bringing a life to a new person, should be considered as queens. And that links to what Liz said. A woman who is being cared, a mother who is being good care of, can transform the society. And I think that's what I wanted just to raise, to that they don't dilute in the discussion.
Thank you very much for that comment, and that's a great way to finish actually as well. So I would just like to ask you all to please raise your hands for our three incredibly inspiring speakers and women. And if you have more questions or answers, please feel free to approach them during the breaks. So hands for them.
Thank you so much, ladies. There were so many other questions. There were so many other questions. We will have time as part of the gap analysis that we'll be doing at the end of today. So questions that you had, try and transform them in your mind into potential points that we might want to actually put up on our sticky notes. Okay, so we now have a case study. We heard a lot this morning, basically about the money. It always comes down to money in public houses, Bibs. And so we now have our colleague Marciano Dans and Ivor Blockland from the Hofnar present BV, which is one of the organizations for this event. So over to you, Marciano.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Good afternoon, everybody. Warm welcome to this those 2 days. Must be special for lots of us to have this conference. And first of all, I would like to share our feelings about Ivor and I. We discussed it through the day, and the feelings are when we don't feel safe, we need to be careful, even now, at this spot. And I would like to address that's why we decided that I will be the one having the presentation. So we decided also to keep it as safe as possible for this position. And I hope you respect that as well. Thank you so much for your cooperation for that. Well, I'll try to push the button. My mandate to speak to you here arises from our charity destiny on this issue, and my expertise as a public administration scientist on institutional tasks. Some of these experience originates from the assistance that the Hofnar presents offers to victims of discrimination at the intersection where government policy affecting the Black community ultimately impacts their health. If I'm correct, then this abstract will be more than less what we will discuss within those 10 minutes from now. We have offered customized support and assistance to both victims and the employees, especially from our position as advisor to the Board of Governors, ministers, or other high officials. Two cases we will discuss will be the tax office scandal and national police. Organizations, including companies, doctors, have no knowledge of exclusion, discrimination, and racism, and therefore do not know how this affects the health of employees. The result is that organizations remain reluctant to act. That's our experience each day. A pro health policy for Europeans from African descent is what we need to further optimize the contribution to society. So, if I'm correct, then we will discuss it within the 10 minutes from now. So this is the overview. So let's start with the introduction. The health of Europeans of African descent is under serious pressure. Too much effort is needed to convince policymakers that there is a lack of recognition, knowledge, and experience about the health of Europeans of African descent. There is no other way to describe the global impact of George Floyd's murder. That's what I stated when the discussion started in 2021, within front of the mayor in the Rotterdam Council City Hall, while he was making an excuse for the part Rotterdam had during the period of slavery. To this day, medical science in the Netherlands uses the following vision in its care for Europeans of African descent. They can deal with pain much better than other Europeans. Although numerous recent studies unequivocally reject this view, the Ministry of Health is reluctant to act. It is only willing to acknowledge the problem without recognizing the responsibility for the problems. This view poses for Europeans of African descent. I also refer to Dr. Helga Proctor, and she's with us today, so thank you so much, who argues that our contemporary medical knowledge carries within itself a post-colonial paradox. On the one hand, medicine as a service, including patients who are not among the implicit standard patient, like discussed in the morning, male, light skin color, normal BMI, etc., in the development of the knowledge which is required. Guidelines, technologies, medication, and medical education, it all will pass those 2 days. On the other hand, the medicine has a harrowing history of unethical practices, experiments on enslaved people. Racial myths and stereotypes from this period of the transatlantic slavery history is still present in the world today medical care, resulting in the exclusion of large group of people who are not the imagined patient. European civil servants of African descent who works for example, the healthcare, police, services, etc., and other public services are confronted with a lack of recognition of their personal problems while doing duty. At the same time, they are the enforcers of our non-discrimination principle, which is enshrined in Article 1 of our Constitution. To give an example, almost 25% of the newly recruited African descent police officers in the Netherlands leave the organization within 2 years after their start. Europeans from African descent are not being fully recognized by the Dutch national institutions such as the CBS and SCP in a proper description. Those two institutions are delivering statistic data and citizen profiles. Almost every other government organization, corporates, and small businesses relies on their data and profiles. I have requested multiple times for a more inclusive description for several citizen profiles. I have even requested multiple times to confirm how my own personal citizenship fits to those profiles, and till today, they are not willing to answer my question. Some contemporary problems. Today we will refer concretely to two well-documented policy missteps that highly impacted Europeans from African descent. The first we will discuss is the tax office scandal. Algorithms of the Dutch tax office targeted parents with non-Dutch family names, unjustly accusing them of fraud with childcare compensation and demanding families to return to the allowances received over a number of years. This led to bankruptcies and important disruptions within family structures. By the time that the policy was declared unlawful, thousands of Black people were unjustly targeted, and they are still facing the backlash of a government which is reluctant to compensate victims and survivors. Discrimination within the police. Police officers participated in a bus called in Dutch the blauwe familie or the blue family, referring to the color of the uniform, denouncing discrimination of Black, Muslim, LGBTQ officers within the Dutch National Police. And I will ask Eiffel to help us from the way our office has handled this from that moment till now. Eiffel, I would ask you to give us those words.
I hope you can hear me. I'm going to introduce myself, and in the story I'm going to tell you more about my experiences are. Yeah. I'm Eiffel Blokland, 50 years old, father of 4 young children, and since September 2023, an associate advisor at the Hofnar Center. I'm seconded to the Hofnar because my actual employer since 2001 is the Dutch police. I've seen and experienced good, beautiful, professional, but also ugly things during my time in the police. I have to be careful in selecting and expressing my words because I must not damage the Dutch police force. People who have suffered harm from exclusion, including discrimination and racism, may need support from the healthcare sector. I've experienced enough exclusion in the Dutch police force. I sought support, and after 3 short conversations, during which the supporter constantly watched the time, I was presented with the following solutions. Solution 1. I had to address the problem of discrimination and racism with the highest supervisor. Option 2. I had to accept that the culture of the police is and will remain as it is. Option 3. I could leave the police organization. These were the 3 options that I could not fully agree with. And I approached it differently. I saw primarily an institutional problem system that I was facing. And this needed to be addressed differently. And together with 6 other police officers, I worked in the documentary The Blauwe Familie, a documentary about internal exclusion within the Dutch police force. And the documentary is also available in English. At the Hofnar, I have delved into the Dutch National Tax Office scandal, 2004. I saw clearly similarities with the police and the healthcare sector. The lack of recognition, the absence of ownership and responsibility towards those affected by exclusion. I mainly saw individuals functioning in processes within the system where the system fundamentally fails to recognize responsibility towards approximately 4.6 million inhabitants of the Netherlands with bicultural roots, who very likely also have different needs or support requests. In the Netherlands, there are 20,000 people with an Italian background, 350,000 people with a Suriname background, and 325 people with a sub-Saharan African background. What does the Dutch healthcare system look like for these groups of people?
Thank you, Ivo.
That's my contribution.
Thank you.
Very much.
We as the Hofnar has offered customized support and assistance and also transcultural skills to both victims and their employers. In this case, the Board of Governors of the Tax Office and the National Police. We did that because it's quite important to find a certain way and a certain kind of body language to overcome those differences, because when they were talking, we were talking about different levels, different skills, etc., etc. We help them to navigate the bureaucracy on their path towards compensation and justice, including access to mental health care and other health care, due to pronounced and continuous exposure to racism and discrimination by official state bodies. Central to the approach we do is that the agency of survivors is recognized and that victims and former victims of discrimination play a key role in their personal recovery journey. Follow-through problems in healthcare we see. In both cases, we saw similar problems. Organizations, including company doctors, have no knowledge of exclusion, discrimination, and racism, and therefore do not know how this affects the health of their employees. The result is that organizations remain reluctant to act. The GP is the only place where health problems resulting from exclusion, discrimination, and racism can be dealt with. But the general practitioner is also limited by the current Health Insurance Act. To this day, existing institutions such as the trade union, working councils, and even the internal ombudsperson cannot provide any significance in recognizing and arranging the necessary care for public servants. All this is what we, as the Hofnar, take care of. In the Netherlands, the Insurance Act, among other things, is in force. The Insurance Act covers more than just medical care, such as diagnostic, medication, and operations. Care aimed at maintaining function in the event of the consequence of condition or disability also falls under the same care. Regular professionals, such as GP, but also doctors and physiotherapists, use alternative medicine in addition to their regular treatment, but are limited in case of discrimination, racism, and exclusion. The law does not provide sufficient provision for this, which limits the possibilities. Alternative and complementary medicine can be a very valuable addition to conventional medicine. However, they are not reimbursed by basic insurance. I'd like to make a step aside, because like many Europeans from African descent, I have been educated on the basis of both European philosophies and philosophy with an African base. After my studies, I had the opportunity to delve deeper into Eastern philosophies. Our agency is very diverse, multi-language, and works on numerous institutional and inclusion assignments. The core of our work, using multiple perspectives to recognize and value a plurality of realities in intervention, also policy interventions. European philosophy teaches us that every context, for example, the institution, the region, or the target group, requires a different approach or plurality. Also mentioned by my former professor, who was a high ranked advisor to the state or prison. I would like to call this the IPER perspective, debated him lots of time. And the IPER perspective has one certain thing, and that is that the individual recognition and acclaim is one of the most highest things you can achieve, also in academic scene. While in other regions in the world, for example, now I'm talking about African humanism, but also in Asia. On the other hand, also promotes human rights such as a good care for everyone, regardless of gender, nationality, skin color, without losing sight of critical thinking. And I think one of the most important philosophers of the past century will be Professor Boside Oluwide. I would recommend her work, absolutely, because she was the one who was able to convince peers, professor, national governments to use other religions and the philosophies when they are busy with policy making, try to solve it. And I would call this the collective perspective. Some recommendations. Well, I started with that the health for Europeans of African descent is under pressure. We need recognition, knowledge, and experience about the health of Europeans. So where to begin? From our professional point of view, experiential expertise cannot be denied when working on some problem-solving solutions. With a serious pressure nowadays, it's time that we start embracing interventions that secures an equality, health, access, and treatment. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights states in its fact sheets on the right to health that the facilities, goods, and services should also respect medical ethics and be gender sensitive and culturally appropriate. In other words, they should be medically and culturally acceptable for the ones who has to deal with it most, and that will be our citizens. So some recommendations. Revision of the current policy and legislation in light of the cases of racism and discrimination affecting both healthcare professionals and patients. Research into long-term effects of racism, excluding and discrimination on the health of survivors. Research and specific recognition of PTSS and other trauma-related illness as a direct consequence of prolonged racism, especially when it comes to European servants and public servants. The inclusion of transcultural care in the base scheme is a necessity. I only mention solutions that encourage us to no longer ignore our blind spots in healthcare for Europeans of African descent. The point, we don't have time to talk about them, and us when it comes to the need for more diversity in our health policy. A proper health policy for Europeans from African descent is what we need to further optimize their contribution to society. People in need of care in general, policymakers like to take these persons as a starting point, have never existed. Neither has the European, but by the way, but people in need of care are more diverse and colorful than ever. I only repeat the words of former Dutch Minister of Healthcare, Jet Bismarck, stated in her oration in 2019. So, we can stop this irrelevant paradox only if there is recognition for the missing knowledge and expertise by policymakers. Policymakers who are more than willing to overcome this gap by accepting our knowledge, our points of view, our experiences, our networks, and most important of all, our endless effort and dedication for a healthier Europe for every one of us. That's why the Hofnar fights against any form of institutional injustice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marciano. Okay, I think we're now ready, and thank you, Otion. So I think we're now ready